Jim.
Thank you, John. John told me that story last night. I hadn't heard that, so I just wanted to say it makes it look like we knew what we were doing, but I didn't know anything. Thanks for the opportunity to share these stories with you in this memorable trip that I had. Before we get started, there are 3x5 cards on your table if you want to write your name on that 3x5 card. In the end, I'm going to give a trivia question. I have a nice gift that was given to me on the trip that I will give away. Probably won't happen today. As we collect the cards, we'll figure out who it is, and next week we'll give away to the Rotarian that is present that knows the answer to that trivia question. This trip far exceeded my expectations. The Mays have 4 history-related trips on their bucket list, so to speak. This is one of the 4, so hopefully we'll get to the rest. But let me say first that I'm not an expert on Titanic, but I do have a passion for it. My hope today is that I will be able to translate for you a little bit about the experience we felt being out there over the site of this historic occasion. This trip seemed a little spooky at first. My daughter, who's here, said, actually called while I was on the way to the port saying, "You sure you want to go, Dad? I think you're testing fate." But I followed through with it. There were 2 trips, or two ships on the trip, the Balmoral and the Asmara Journey. The trip objective was 1 ship left from New York, 1 ship left from England. We were to meet over the crash site on the exact moment of the historic events which occurred on April 14th and 15th and try and reenact and remember all those events as best we could at the exact moment in time, 100 years later. Next slide. The Titanic bow and stern are located in the North Atlantic at these locations, about 2,000 feet apart. I took a picture there because, and I'm glad I did, because someone asked me later on, what's it look like out there? So I guess you can tell, hopefully you can tell I'm over the Titanic. Assured I am. The final reported position of Titanic are at these coordinates from the communications they received. However, the actual resting place of Titanic is about 13.5 miles away. And this has proved to be part of the reason why it took so long to find Titanic. They were searching close to these coordinates, but it wasn't there. Commander Ballard is the one who has the credit for finding Titanic on that date. By the way, I asked this question last night. I'll pause here for a second. How many of you heard the real story about how Titanic was found? It's only been released in the last few years. Steve Stewart, I know you do. Raise your hand. Anyone else know the real story about how the Titanic was found? Okay, I will take a minute. Goes like this. Ballard was a commander in the Navy Reserves. He had a passion to find Titanic. 3 people were looking for it. He was zeroing in on it. He developed new equipment to find Titanic. He had the answer. He was short on resources. He approached the Navy Submarine Welfare Department and said, "Can you help?" They said, "We're not in the ship finding business." So he went away momentarily discouraged. However, what he did not know was the Navy wanted his equipment. They wanted to know information, top secret mission, how was the Thresher sank, where is it, likewise the Scorpion. Those 2 nuclear subs were sank in the 60s during the Cold War era. They wanted his equipment. They made a deal. The deal was, I'm going to give you X number of days to find these 2 subs. Tell me what I need to know. Was the Russians poking around down there? Is the nuclear stuff there? Find it, get back to me. If there's any time left over in this period of time, and it escapes me what the time was, but if there's any time left over, you can look for Titanic on our nickel. So we all helped. He did his mission. He found the first one. Went down south of the Azores. He found the second one. Raced back up to the North Atlantic, to the site. What he learned when he found Thresher and Scorpion, what he learned was they both supposedly imploded, although there's some that feel that the Russians sank the Scorpion. What he found was this stuff, when it implodes and falls to the bottom, it just doesn't fall in a nice little neat pile. It leaves a debris field. The debris fields in both of these nuclear subs were over a mile long. He said that had to happen in Titanic. He went back up to the site, he spread out, he mapped the floor, 30-mile square section, like mowing your lawn, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. With only 4 days left, he hit the debris field, found Titanic. That's the story, how you and I helped find Titanic. He's also found the Bismarck, he's found the Yorktown, and he's found JFK's PT-109, all famous ships that he's since taken the knowledge that he's gained from this equipment, and he's found these ships as well. What we did on this cruise was every morning, it was like an 8-day history cruise with morning and afternoon sessions. They were on various different subjects like the iceberg, communications failures, my diving to Titanic, etc. And they were repeated throughout the trip. Next slide. One of the speakers was a lady from Germany by the name of Brigitte. She won a dive. She inherited a second dive. She's a very famous speaker, travels all over the world. And actually, the dive that she inherited, the individual had his ashes spread over the site at the memorial service, which I'll get to shortly. And that's a picture of her. Very famous, as I said. A couple of things hanging on her shoulder. She's the first tourist to make the dive to Titanic. She's only one of 20 women in the world to ever see Titanic. And she is still to this day the youngest person, male or female, to ever see Titanic. So she has a lot of knowledge on that. And next slide. I'm happy to say that, of course I was happy in that picture, I'm happy to say that she agreed to give me some of her slides, so I'll just give you, at the courtesy of her, some of the slides that she gave me. All trips to Titanic leave from Newfoundland, St. John's in Newfoundland. By the way, they're there now. The last 4 scheduled trips began July 1st, every 2 weeks to mid-August, and that is the last scheduled tourist trips to Titanic as of now, being the 100th year. They all leave from Newfoundland. This is her preparing for her dive. It's interesting because what you see in the background is the captain waiting. He's looking through one of the portals. Next slide. This is your living quarters for a little while. The sub's about 25 feet long. This titanium, this capsule sits inside the sub, about 6 to 7 feet in diameter. This other lady here was just along for the trip. She was not making the dive. The captain's here. 2 gentlemen on the dive. Dive takes 11 to 12 hours. Bathrooms back the hall to the left? No. I'll let you ponder on that when that question usually comes up. But here we go. These are her pictures, courtesy of Brigitte. This is obviously, it looks like a bathtub. This is the captain's bathtub. You know, probably used it maybe 3 times. And that sits the same where it was back then. Next. It's called a davit. A davit, if you've noticed in the movies, as they lower the boats. These are the arms that lower the boats up and down. This is one of the davits that still remains on the ship. Next. Obviously, the propeller. Most dangerous part of the dive is close enough to see the propeller. Reason being, the propellers on Titanic, if you've seen the pictures, sit in under the back of the stern about 50, 60 yards. The stern section, which we were camped over, very fragile. When you go in to take this picture, it's no touch. You don't touch the bottom, you go up 1/2 knot, you don't touch the propeller, and you don't touch the stern above you. You sneak in, you take the picture, and you back out, and there's no second going. They consider it extremely dangerous to take this picture. Obviously, you've seen this picture many times. This is the bow. This is the picture she took while circling the bow on Titanic, which is 2.5 miles down. Next picture. This is the bridge area, some of the communications area. When you go down in 2 subs, Mirror 1 and Mirror 2. The light you see there is Mirror 2 from the other sub shining on there to have this picture taken. Just another section of the Titanic. These are light fixtures just hanging down from the ceiling, just the way they are. Rusticles growing all over everything. It's the last picture I have at the moment on this section. This is a mystery chest. They don't know what it is. They don't know how it got there. It looks like a safe. If you notice right here, it looks like a combination. They insist it's not a safe. I said it looks like a safe. They say we don't have a record of a safe. This is a plate somehow that fell down on top. This is like your geranium planter sitting on the corner of your porch. You know, it's what it looks like. So that's just some of the pictures that she shared with me. She also took on the dive some cups, styrofoam cups, just in order to get a feel for the tremendous amount of pressure that's underwater. She took 3 styrofoam cups, put them in a bag, and tied them on the outside of the sub. And she had cups, and these styrofoam cups come in different sizes, but some of these were like the 9-inch, and some were like the 6-inch, but you come back with a 1.5-inch styrofoam cup, is what you come back with, because of the tremendous amount of pressure at that depth. Excuse me. Indoor memorial service. The service started at 11:30 on Saturday, April 14th. And what we intended to do was try and reenact, and with a reverence, everything that happened on the trip. And this was the minister getting started with that. 10 minutes later, at 11:40, ship's whistle sounded from us, answered by the Balmoral. That was how we signified hitting the iceberg at 11:40 at the exact moment with ship's whistle. 11:45, and this was intermixed with a traditional service. At 11:45, we started reading, not us, but the system started displaying every deceased person on the trip. All 1,503 names were read. It took an hour and 15 minutes while they flashed through the screen. I actually found 3 Mays that were deceased on this trip. I forgot to tell my kids that. But there were 3 Mays that passed. I didn't know that. Interestingly, at 10 minutes after 12, unbeknownst to us, they didn't tell us they were doing this. You heard this tap, 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 Marconi code, Morse code. They started to signal Newfoundland, for real. We have struck iceberg, sinking fast, need assistance. I didn't know what the dots and dashes meant, but signed, MGY, call sign, Titanic. Sat there for a little bit, and he's looking at everybody, what's going on? What's happening? Next minute, response comes back from Newfoundland, received message. Later, they told us what this was, but it was scary at first that over 500 people turned out in Newfoundland just to hear that message 100 years later, and the response had a big party in Newfoundland. It's kind of neat, I guess. After this portion of the service, we transferred up to the upper deck outside. outside for the 2 a.m. portion of this service, which is by far the earliest Sunday service I've ever gone to. It happened to be on a Sunday this year. So, and this is the minister. If you can see over here in the corner, they're bringing out the wreaths. There were wreaths tossed into the ocean in remembrance of the 1,503 that didn't make it as a part of this service. The last song. I know Henry's here and other musicians are here, of course. This was debated during the trip. This was the harpist. This was the band leader playing, I guess, the role of Wallace Hartley. And another one of our speakers. There's always been a debate about what was the last song. I think they got this one figured out. And there still is a lot of contradiction about all the trivia that Titanic has. But the song that was debated was, is it the Song of Autumn or is it Near My God to Thee? That's been the debate. And some of how that debate arose is as follows. The Marconi operators on board, I akin it to Morse code, were guys by the name of Phillips and Bride. At this point, about 2:10 a.m., Titanic's bows underwater, stern's lifting out of the water, water's coming into the bridge area. These two guys, who are not even employed by White Star Line, they are employed by Marconi. They were really on the ship, not to be safety experts. Their primary job on the ship was just to transfer your personal messages back and forth to the States. This was a big deal then to be able to send messages. However, they were quickly thrown into this role of, we need help. Captain walks in, says there's nothing more you can do. Save yourself. Phillips, they all leave. Captain, of course, and Phillips do not make it. Bride just barely makes it on the last lifeboat off Titanic. He says, the last song I heard was Song of Autumn. That's it. He testified that. That's the last song I heard. I don't know that particular song, but that's what he said. However, Titanic probably had 5 to 10 minutes left before totally going under. He goes away in a lifeboat. There's probably at this point only about 5 or 6 people, they guess, that were on the ship who may have survived somehow by getting picked up or whatever. Those people testify, no, that was not the song, that they started another song. Before I get to that, I just happened to take this. As we were leading up to this song at the magic moment, I couldn't help but snap a picture of the moment 100 years later, 2:22, I might have gone off by 30 seconds, 2:22 a.m. when the actual sinking took place. The next one. The question is, which version, what song did they play and which version was it? What number are you on, Daniel? There you go. You will recognize the song. It's about a 20-second clip. Just to give you a feel for that moment, there's actually 3 versions to that song: the English, the Methodist, and the Bethany, or the American version. For some reason, they chose the American version, or the Bethany version. I guess maybe because of the Americans that were on the ship. But that was the song that they played. This is the Balmoral, about 2,000 feet away. They were anchored over the bow. We were anchored, so to speak. Somebody said over the stern. We weren't anchored. We were just sitting there. What I would say to you here is that I never realized how dark it is in the middle of the ocean until this trip. The only thing you see is a little bit of reflection here. All the conditions that we had were identical, ironically, to 100 years ago. No moon, flat calm, and clear skies. So, and we were predicted to have heavy rain, thunderstorms, and high seas during the service. Somehow, it just miraculously worked out. It was identical, but it is unbelievably dark in the middle of the ocean. Unlike the movie, there was only about 38 seconds to impact. The movie, I think, is like a minute. And what we found out, I asked the question, was in the movie they reverse engines. They told us there was no time to reverse engines. It was, there it is, and this is what it's like. And they tried evasive action, but obviously it didn't work. This is one of our keynote speakers too, a guy named Ken Marshall. He's very noted in the industry as an artist on Titanic. He's made a lot of books seen on TV. Next, he's actually made 5 or 6 dives, and I will show you some of the stuff that he has supplied me with. This is a picture. This is not underwater. This is a picture of a first-class room. And if you had a first-class room, you had a butler, and he came in, as you can see here. Those on the end can see a water pitcher and a glass here. And they supplied you with your water. That's what you paid the extra freight for. Next, they found a first-class room where the water pitcher is still standing. That happens to be in a bracket, so to speak. This glass is just sitting there. The only thing that they can figure out is that it must have had water in it. How else? What would hold it that it would still be there? Still there. Next. Right now, when you travel, if you make the dive to Titanic, every dive now has a purpose. You just don't drop down there and look at the bow and look at the propeller and that. The oceanographers that go down to Titanic now are trying to separate each area of the ship and find out what they can before it's too late. A recent dive went to the Turkish bath area. Very ornate. This is obviously a picture from 100 years ago of that Turkish bath area. A lot of stained glass in that area. And this picture actually is a picture underwater. Some of the glass is still there and is still intact. Next. There's another picture underwater of stained glass at one of the walls in the Turkish bath area. Next picture. Here's another area of the Turkish bath area. I'll point out to you, all the rooms in the Turkish bath area of Titanic had what looks like a Hershey kiss here. It looks like a Hershey kiss cut in half, made out of brass or copper above the doorways. This actually is a water fountain. Next. This is that same picture, underwater. It's hard to see, but this actually is the water fountain. A lot of stained glass, lights hanging from the ceilings, rusticles dripping down. Still fairly well intact at this point. One of my favorite pictures is coming up here. This is that area over a doorway, brass, copper, whatever. A picture from 100 years ago. This is stained glass. You see a little circle here? Another little section of stained glass here. Next picture. This is that exact same doorway. This picture came out really well. See the dome, copper, brass, doorway. You see the little stained glass circle here? Amazing that this piece still exists like this today. Rusticles hanging down. Another picture on deck. This is A deck, D-E-C-K. The A, raised lettering, fell off, but this is A deck. I think it's an elevator that opens up. I'm not quite sure what this was anymore. Next picture. Everybody's known, seen the grand staircase. Here is the grand staircase in a picture. Some furniture sitting around. Here is that exact same column today on Titanic. Eaten away, rusted away, furniture just laying around. That's what it looks like. Next. Grand staircase. This particular section everybody's seen in the movies. What you have is a 3-story section that is totally gone away. Next. Here's a picture of what's left. Everything's fallen down. About 3 stories, just one big hole in the ship. Next. You can tell this is a stairway, hand railings, steps down, rusticles everywhere. Next. Another section, just one big hole where all this is just gone away. Next. This happened to be his dive coming back up on his submersible, being brought back into the Caldish, I think it's pronounced. Next. A couple personal stories. Everyone knows of the Strausses, I'm sure. Macy's fame, owners of Macy's. One of the 4 top cabins were inhabited by the Strausses. They both perished. They knew in their suite that there was a clock on the mantle, and they have not been able to get into their suite to determine if the clock is still there until recently. And guess what? The clock is still there. Still sitting on the mantle. Debris everywhere. Next. Just a couple stories. The Speeden family, first class. I put this in here for Joan Mummer. Maine history. 2 Speedens, 1 child, all survived. He was 5 or 6 years old. Survived the Titanic, went home, vacationing in Maine. 3 years later, age 9, he becomes the first fatality in an automobile accident in Maine. 1915. Not many cars. First fatality, probably in Maine. Next one. Just a couple graveyard sites in Halifax. Last person picked up, McGrady, number 330, picked up 50 miles away from the crash, about 50 days later by another ship passing through. Next one. Jack Dawson, not Jack Dawson. There is a Jack Dawson. Joe Dawson, although this area gets stomped down for photo taking all the time. People thinking that's Jack Dawson. He was a leveler on the ship, moved the coal back and forth. That's what his job was. Next. One of the famous people on the ship, John Law Hume, he was one of the 8 musicians who passed away. The story goes like this. I like to go on the trip. I don't have the money. I need a violin. Maybe I should have 2 violins. Dad says, I'll help you. Dad mortgages his house to buy 2 violins. He perishes. He loses his 2 violins. His dad ran on hard times and he lost his life. He lost his house. And 2 weeks later, after the Titanic sank, the guy he rented the uniform from sent the estate a bill for his uniform. Next. I just took this picture coming back in because it reminded me on the exact same day, 100 years later, there were 1,503 people that didn't see this that probably wanted to see this. Next. Titanic's loaded with trivia. I'll just think of a couple here. There were 2 dogs made it to the lifeboats while there were 497 seats that went on filled. 2 dogs made it. Rumor still exists that the deed across the street to the Lafayette Club is on the Titanic. I don't know if you heard that one or not. And let me think what else. Here's a couple you might not know. More people successfully climb Mount Everest each year than I've ever seen Titanic. It's only about 200 people that have ever seen Titanic, and I had the pleasure of meeting about 6 or 8 of them that have seen Titanic. You do have a card on your table. I'm going to give you a question. Write your name down and an answer. If you don't know the answer, guess. If you don't guess, you still have a chance to win. What we'll do is we'll pick these up after Rotary's over. If there's 5 correct answers, we'll pull the 5 out of the hat next week, and whoever wins gets a very nice commemorative book that they gave me of these 2 cruises that took place, hardback book. It's really nice. They gave me an extra one to give away. And that's what we'll do. So we won't be able to settle this today. So you must be present next week to win it. But here goes. Other than drowning and or hypothermia, what was the next most common cause of death on the Titanic? Other than drowning or hypothermia, what was the next most common cause of death? There's lots of possible answers out there. When I found this out, I was shocked. But you have to wait the next week and fill out your cards, let them lay on the table, and I'll turn it back to John.